welcome to our next episode of Governance in Action for All Women. Governance is a topic that's obviously very, very close to our hearts at CEGIS. And we really try and understand what makes this entity called the Government of India, the state governments, and the local governments work. Because in India, let's face it, the government is the only provider of essential services for the vast, vast majority of the population. We are focusing a little bit, of course, on the impact of the government and the government machinery on women and girls. But we will talk and try and unpack as we go along what makes the government work and what constitutes governance in action. I have the pleasure of welcoming a very eminent retired IAS officer of the Odisha cadre, Ms. Arti Ahuja. Ma'am, we are delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Mansi. Thanks for that introduction as well.
Now, when we get into governance, I think many of us outside the government don't realize the sheer complexity of execution of getting any government service. Now, it could be health, education, nutrition, sanitation, anything to the last mile. So, in your experience as a bureaucrat, ma'am, can you share any examples of the complexity in execution, the challenges, and how you overcame them to actually deliver to the last mile?
So what happens with government is that there are a lot of checks and balances, there are a lot of tiers of decision making. So in a way, it's good because you cannot just do random stuff, right? But at the same time, you also have to seize the opportunity where you can make a difference. So when I was health secretary in Odisha, I used to go incognito to different hospitals without telling people, at least in the initial phase. At that time, there wasn't much of social media kind of a thing. So I would go and just observe people and talk to the patients. So I went to the regional cancer center in Cuttack. And there I saw, and that face is there in my mind. I cannot forget that face. I saw a tribal woman and her husband. She must have been, middle aged. And she had a scar on her chest, which was bandaged. And I asked her where she had come from. She had come from Navrangpur, which is one of the remotest districts, tribal districts of our state. And I asked her where she was staying. And she said they had hired a lodge for 300 rupees. She had come to the cancer center for chemotherapy. She had to come every month for that chemotherapy and, travel by bus, loss of livelihood. They had also sold their land. It really bothered me a lot, that phase and what they had undergone just to come to Cuttack. And, this was happening all over the state. Everybody had to come to Cuttack for chemotherapy. So then I started asking myself if it was possible, and I talked to a lot of experts, all of whom told me it was not possible because it could only be done by a trained medical oncologist and not by anybody else. So they told me it's not possible to do it at a district headquarters. Anyhow, so we persisted, me and my team, and we talked to a lot of private people. We asked for applications from young doctors who were part of the government system and nurses and the paramedical staff. They came, we interviewed them, and those who were very keen on it, we sent them for training to private hospitals. We formed our own teams in the government as well and started chemotherapy in the district hospitals. So that first thing of a chemotherapy center in Navrangpur with people getting chemotherapy, I think that was one of the happiest days of my life. And in the recent budget, it has been announced now that daycare chemotherapy centers will be opened in all the districts of the country. So it is something like this, a small thing for us, but it makes a lot of difference to a person who doesn't now have to travel so far for their chemotherapy needs.
It's an amazing example. And like you said, the replicability, what you may have started with one district in mind, if it can be replicated across all of India, then I think that is really the scale that only the government can provide.
Yes.
So, ma'am, I'd just like to go back to the self-help groups and Mission Shakti, because from all that one has read, I think Odisha has sort of set a national and maybe even an international benchmark in self-help groups. So could you talk a little bit about how it happened? And I mean, we all understand the benefit of self-help groups, but how did it happen and how did it scale up to such a vast extent?
It had already started happening. Because if you remember a long time back in Andhra, the women's self-help groups just women started this movement against liquor. And it really caught the fancy and imagination of everybody. And it also came to Orissa. It started in a few pockets of Orissa with that. A few NGOs, few other civil society organizations promoted these women's self-help groups. And that's when the government took over. What we did at that time was it requires to build a self-help group, 10 women who have no knowledge of financing. They don't know how to open a bank account. They don't know how to negotiate with somebody who wants to buy their product. So it's a long haul, and the gestation period is fairly long, but it has to be done from within the community. You cannot supplant and do something like that. So it has to be built slowly from the ground up, and that's what government did. It invested in those processes. So each self-help group member became equal in that group, knew everything. They knew how to negotiate these pathways. And the women in Orissa have really, I would say, they have themselves created other self-help groups. They have been the leaders in that. Government has been a facilitator, but they are the ones. And today I find a lot of women in a whole lot of, I mean, wherever I travel within Odisha, I went somewhere yesterday. There was a restaurant in a remote area being run by a Mission Shakti group. They go and read electricity meters. They do, I mean, unimaginable things, mechanic, welder, this, that, everything that you can think of. They are doing that.
So now, especially with the increasing use of technology, I do believe the government collects lots and lots of data. So, over the years, how have you seen technology help the government and all the government functionaries with data? And how has decision making using data become more democratized? Because data is now theoretically at least more widely available. So, just your thoughts on that.
In terms of doctors, since I was in health, I used to do grievance cell every Monday afternoon, and I would have to sit late hours, and most of it was because of doctors, also women, coming and saying, look, I have been in that place for 10 years, 15 years, and I've not been transferred to where my husband is posted, although that's our policy, because of this, that, or the other. Also, because people don't have godfathers. Once they go to a tribal area, then they're not transferred back, and etc. So, what you were talking about data. So, when you do the mapping on very objective criteria, okay, which are the primary health centers, CHCs, district hospitals, distance from the main road, other facilities, you can actually categorize them into different categories. And then you say, okay, if you've been there for that many years, this is your score. Somebody else will have this score, and you make that data public, publish it on the website so that people can say, oh no, she's saying she's been there for 20 years, but actually 5 years she was on leave. This is your ranking based on where you worked. Come, we'll put up screens. You sit, our people will be sitting with the computers, and this is the data available. This is the evidence. So whoever is the first one will come and will say, I want to go there. Okay, so that place is gone. And it was such a transparent process. So we gave priorities. So in the marking ranking system, we gave priority. So if husband has been there for, let's say, 2 years, not 20 years, things like that, that permutation combination, a lot of women and a lot of families were then able to be posted together. And with the assurance that after 5 years, you'll have another chain. And then this time, both will be transferred together and put in the same place. So, even in terms of your motivation of your own team and your own people, this kind of a transparency it helps them because they don't have to then go to any grievance cell and beg for anything. And then this practice then started being followed in the state for everybody, for lecturers, this, that, and everybody. And even now, it's all counseling, open counseling for transfers and initial postings, etc. There was resistance in the beginning. There were some protests and all by some interested people who didn't want to move from Bhubaneswar, but it happened.
But thank you so much for this, ma'am. I think it's been personally extremely enlightening. And I think this is the goal, to really understand what it takes as a government, to deliver for India's citizens day in and day out. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much.